In this module, we're going to take a look at how to find good country property. In part 21 in the website preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, we went in depth explaining how to figure out what to look for in property. And now we're going to look at how to find what you're looking for. So in part 21, we looked at the different regions around the world and how to figure out where would be the best suited location for your search. And then we looked at making a wish list and deciding to prioritize the wish list, and then to combine the wish lists of all of the individuals in your group, be it your husband and wife or family or whoever's involved, the stakeholders in purchasing this property that you're looking for. So now that you have a single list and you have maybe a 2-county idea of where to go, then we're going to talk now about the tools that you can use to look for what might be for sale in those areas. So for starters, back in the day when I first started looking for country property, our second home we built was in the country years ago. Many years ago, and back then nothing was computerized. So you would go into the county assessor's office in the map department, and you would purchase a map and go from there. Nowadays it's way easier because everything's online. So I'm going to show you several online options to utilize, and I would use them all. First of all is realtors. Windermere is just one. We have a church member locally who is a Windermere realtor, so I called her and asked her to tell me what they had to offer online. Another one is realtor.com, one is redfin.com, one is Zillow, one is forsalebyowner.com, and one is Craigslist. So the first one we'll look at is realtors, and this is just one company of a realty company that has a website. There are many that do. They're all similar. Windermere, when you go to the website and you're looking for property, on the right you'll see there's a map of the geographic area. The thing that I like about this is all of these blue dots are properties for sale. And you can put your pointer on top of the dot and it will pop up and show you what it is. In this particular case, caught my eye for this parcel. This is a 19.5 acres of bare land. It has trees and it has a creek, and it is $84,950. This geographic area is Newport, Washington, which is on the border of Idaho on the Washington side and north of Spokane about an hour. This is in the same area, and this is got a house, looks like a quite nice house, has a creek and has trees. Those things are important to my way of thinking. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,300 square foot house with 11 acres. Looks pretty promising to me. Then Redfin is another site that's realty MLS listing oriented, and in this case $50,000 for this parcel. It doesn't have any buildings on it, and I believe it's 5 acres. You can see that they have winter there at this particular moment. All of these that I'm showing you, you can fine-tune your search. You can say, I don't want less than 5 acres. I don't want more than 20. You can put a price limit. You can say, I want the cheapest ones first. I want the latest that came on the market first, etc., etc. I want a house, I don't want a house. So here's Zillow. Zillow is different in that it not only grabs all the multiple listings from the realty side, but it also has houses that are not necessarily for sale, and it'll show you when it sold last and what its value is based on other similar properties. Because the point I want to get at is you don't stop at realtors. That's just a starting point. And there are other avenues to find properties, and Zillow is one of them that will find you properties that might be for sale by owner or may not even be for sale, but you can stumble onto it. So here we got something that came up on Zillow 7 days ago. It's $34,500. It's in Newport area and it's 5 acres, has trees. Sounds like a very good deal to me. Obviously, you'd have to check it out. It might be very. For sale by owner is another good one. And in this case, you click on the state that you're wanting to go to or zip code. And then in this case, we're going to look at foreclosures, you can see. And over on the left, you can say, do I want bare land? Do I want a house? You know, do I want a condo? What kind of criteria? How many miles from this am I willing to be beyond, etc. You can fine tune any of these searches to get right down to specifics. So here is Craigslist. Now you know Craigslist sells everything under the sun, but it's still worth looking at because if somebody is trying to sell their property by themselves without a realtor, Craigslist may be the only place that they've got it. So here's one that I found that's got a view of the river with the highway in between, and it's out of the flood zone. Well, that ought to be a red flag right away that there is flooding. And I'm assuming it's 5 acres and it's $100,000. Now, besides looking for property online, there are some tools. Once you have found a property, you can find information about the property. And one of those is Google Maps. And I use Google Maps for everything from how long it's going to take me to get to my destination to, you know, how long is Home Depot open today. So Google Maps is something I use all the time on my phone, as well as you can do it on your computer. But it also has a companion app called Google Earth, which is free. And Google Earth gives a lot more detail. For instance, when you're looking at a specific parcel of land, you can see the elevation lines. You can see both of these. You can see satellite image, so you can see what it looks like, whether it's trees or logged or fields or whatever, whether there's houses or not. They're both really useful. We used Google Map to locate the property. We used Google Earth once we found the property to find out how steep the land was and all that kind of thing. Another thing that's helpful is you can tell what is nearby. You can tell whether there's a gravel pit or a railroad track or some of those things that would show in an aerial photograph. The other thing that's super useful is the county. Back in the day, you used to have to go into, like I said, the map department and physically go through the stuff. But now everything's online for the most part. So the assessor's office in that county is where you're going to look. And the assessor is the person who's in charge of figuring out the values of all the real estate in the county and assessing a value from which the tax is coming from. So one thing to know about an assessor's value that they put on property is it's usually going to be a little bit lower than what it might sell for, because it's an elected official and they don't want everybody mad at them. So they make it intentionally maybe 20% lower than what the market might be. The exception would be if the property just sold, then that establishes the market, the assessed value, the market value and the assessed value would be the same, because that's what that person was willing to pay for it. Another thing the assessor website will have is IMAP, which we'll talk about in a second, but it's really handy. Both of these are really useful. So here's an example of the assessor's parcel search. The parcel search is, I just arbitrarily looked for John Doe, and there isn't any, so Alan Doe showed up. Alan Doe, here's a good example of why you would not walk up to the house and knock on the door and ask if the house is for sale. And the reason is you don't know if the owner lives there or not. Now, if you look at this particular parcel, the owner, Alan Doe, lives in Redmond, Washington. The site address is not Redmond, Washington. So you know that the owner does not live in the house. So if you went to knock on the door, you probably wouldn't even knock on the door. You would get a hold of Alan Doe and say, are you interested in selling your property? that's on Biz Point Road. You can see on the right of the screen it also has open in IMAP. This is where you would be able to pull up the IMAP that I'll show you in a second. You can also see below you can pull up a PDF, which is like a color photocopy, on your computer and have it saved on your computer. Now I found when I was looking for property, I used a mobile internet connection. That can be done through a smartphone, or it can be done on a portable Wi-Fi, which I happen to have both. So you could be in your vehicle sitting on the street in front of this house and be looking at this website and looking at the maps and everything else. Now notice at the bottom here it says how much the house is worth, which isn't very much compared to the land. The land is worth quite a bit. And I think we'll see why in a minute when we look at the IMAP. But even though the house is $173,000, the whole property is worth almost $700,000. The interesting thing is the market value and the assessed value are the same, $662,900. Why are they the same? Because they just sold the property. And so whoever bought the property paid $662,000. Therefore, the county assessor can say, well, the assessed value is $662,000. Nobody's going to be mad at them because they know that's what they paid for it. So the people that bought it aren't going to be mad that they have to pay the taxes. Well, they're the ones that were willing to pay for it. You can also see how much the taxes are going to be in a year, what the tax value is based on, and so forth. Now here's the IMAP for the same property. Guess what? The reason this is so expensive property is it's sitting on water. So I'm not clear whether this is on the bay, saltwater, or it's a lake or what, but that's view property. Now one of the useful things, a couple things I see on the IMAP that's useful. One is you can see how big this parcel is. Let's say it's 5 acres. I don't know that we know what it is. But you can tell how big the neighboring properties are at a glance compared to this one. So if this was 5 acres, that means the ones to the right are a little bit less, and there's 4 parcels over that's about double. So that might be useful to you. The other thing is you'll notice there's terrain lines. And the elevation, you can tell that up by the road, the property is fairly flat, and then it drops off towards the water. That'll let you know how steep it is at the bank of the river.
The search for country property. Our search for our country property began with a dream that both my wife and I had, that we discovered that we each held in common, and that was someday to live in the country and to live in a log home that we had built. At the time, we were living in a small community subdivision on a small lot in a modest-sized, smaller house. We also had the birth of our children, 2 beautiful daughters who were very young, and after having read the book Country Living by Ellen White, felt like living in this particular spot would not be conducive to raising them in the way that God would intend our children to be raised. That, in conjunction with current events at the time, back in 2011 and thereabouts, also were urging us to make the move out of a small community into a more rural area, given the fact that we had attempted a garden and my wife was not enthusiastic about my attempting to build a garden on the roof of our house where we would have more sun access. We knew that with the amount of shading that we had and was not controllable by our ability to remove trees because of the small nature of our land, would necessitate a move to a different location. So we began the quest. So our first plan was to purchase a country property and there build a log home. We'd been researching different home builders, had visited a couple of properties that had homes built on it from the builder that we were thinking of using, and we're exploring properties. Our second plan was to stay where we were and instead buy an income rental property that could help increase our cash flow and put us in a better position to purchase property when that time would come. Our plan C was a plan that was down the road that wasn't really largely considered at the moment, but was to buy a pre-existing property and work with something that was already existing. So as we began looking for property, we came to the realization that in our area, which is where we were focusing our search in Western Washington, property was expensive and may actually require building in phases. So we started thinking in that line, looking at properties and with the concept of building a barn that had living space associated with it that could function as both storage and living space as we raised the capital to build the house that we had in mind. So that's what we our approach that we began with as we continued to look for our dream property. So one property that we considered seriously was a beautiful property, high elevation in our region. It was beautiful, had a great view all around to the north, the south, east, and the west. It was 20 acres. It was well timbered, but also had some clear space. The building site was actually fairly high, had a creek running through it. It was within short driving distance of work, church, school. Also had very good south-facing exposure that would allow for good solar gain. Some of the cons were that it was expensive, and it definitely would require building in phases. It would be a chunk of change just to purchase the property. It was steep. It would be tough gardening, although there were some semi-level areas that could be terraced or utilized, did have that creek running through it. It was also in quite audible distance of the traffic of Interstate 5, which was a downer for us because we'd be spending a lot of time outside, and being outside and listening to the traffic would be just a constant infringement upon our audible space. It had an unusual water access. It did have a well, but it was actually across the road and probably half a mile away. A series of community wells had been drilled there and sent to the different areas within the development area, which all were larger parcels. There was also, looking at the mineral rights overlays, there was a nearby dormant gravel mine that had not been in use for some time, but had the potential for being reactivated, and we just did not feel that being that close to an adjacent functioning gravel mine would be conducive to a rural experience for which we were looking. And also, there was a sizable group of community covenants and restrictions that were associated with the development that we would have to drive through and be attached to, even though we had 20 acres associated with the property. So there were some pros and there were some cons, and we ended up ultimately deciding to refocus on a different piece of property. So we began looking more at the stay put and income rental property option. We found a house in our local area that was on a short sale, so it was a below value price. We made an offer. It just wasn't going anywhere. It had been in the making in the offer stage for several months, just waiting and waiting and waiting, knowing that short sales can be slow processes. We kept praying during that time that God would open the doors, either for the sale of the house or for a property that we might find that would be the way to go. So it was a period of waiting and continued prayer. So Plan C popped up on us, purchasing a pre-existing property. Just cruising through the listings, interested in real estate, still looking, and this property popped up just one day on the market, 2 days on the market. We looked at it immediately, and we were just taken away by the property here. So it was 1 day on the market. We looked at it the next day and made an offer. If we hadn't had the months and months of our prior searching, we would not have likely been able to make the offer as quickly as we had. So we were thankful that we had made the matter of prayer and the time for searching that we'd had during the course of these months leading up to it. So it was on 5 acres, had a nice south-facing house exposure as well as a north end that was full sun and southern exposure, had a combination of trees and pasture, had outbuildings and a barn in addition to the house. It was near enough to our daily work and church commutes. It was near a river, but out of the floodplain, not attached to the property, but within view. It was a secluded access. It was 30 years old, so for a log home, that's a good sign because the house had settled and was in its state. It wasn't going to be moving anymore. Had low cell service, which actually was a benefit. We noticed that because our realtor actually had a hard time accessing the house with her phone app because of the spotty cell service on the lockbox. But being out of the range of Wi-Fi was a bonus. And since that time, we've had a cell tower that's been put in probably a couple miles away, but we're still out of that direct cone of influence. It was a craftsman quality home. There were a couple things that were a little bit challenging through the process. One was that even though it was a solid structure, the rodents had been left free to run. It had been neglected for 6 years. The exterior had completely gone down. The interior was in decay, not in literal decay, but just disuse, and kind of had some serious issues interior, although the floor and the integrity of the home was solid. Lots of remodel potential. It was undervalued as a bank sale, and we were fortunate to be able to find that and acquire it already built and in position for about the value of the 20 acres of raw land that we had been looking at prior. So we saw it first in February, shortly after it was on the market. The process took a long time, acquiring the access issues and working with the bank and the previous owner of an adjacent parcel that had been prior attached to this land, and finally took possession in July of that same year. So it was a rather lengthy process, and we were able to purchase this property. It was undervalued at the time, and there was one of the issues was financing, because it was a unique property. Finding comparables for it was challenging. Our first financing had fallen through, and because of that problem, but we were able to find a local lender who was able to do that for us, for which we were thankful. So prayer, patience, and persistence were the 3 key components to working through this process. The original driveway to the house was actually across a piece of property that had originally been a part of a 10-acre piece that the house had been a part of, but had separated during the foreclosure process, the land being raw land being held in an owner financing situation had gone back to the original owner, while the house and 5 acres had gone to the bank. So the person who owned the land that the driveway was across was holding that kind of hostage and not allowing the bank to purchase easement across the land to access the property. She was endeavoring to have the property purchaser purchase her land as well. So we were able to actually discover that there was a north easement that was available that just hadn't been developed, applied for an address change, and were able to make that work in conjunction with a price reduction on the home if we would undertake the access issues, which we were able to do. And then I already mentioned the financing challenges of the unique property and the multiple lenders that we went through. And then there was another boundary issue of an electrical box that the owner of the adjacent property was claiming would need to be moved at great expense if we were to purchase the property, which, as it turned out, after we asked for a boundary survey, was actually on the purchased property versus on her property anyway. So it was just a smokescreen again to try to attempt to push us into purchasing her property, which we would have liked to have done, but it was outside the scope of our financial capabilities at the time. So numerous answers to prayer. One of those was that when we moved into the home several months later, discovered that the size of the logs in the house was much greater than we had expected or anticipated. When we were thinking of building a home, we were thinking of a log size of about 8 inches, which was the larger of the kit-sized homes. And when we moved into our home, I noticed one day that the logs were large. They're between 10 and 16 inches each log. And Ephesians 3:20 immediately came to mind. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. Ephesians 3:20. We've been very blessed to live here, and we just seek to honor God in our use and ability to have and maintain this property as we continue to honor him. So one of the things to consider when you're looking at property is the access. So this is kind of a rough outline of our situation. We had a 5-acre parcel in blue that was across which the original driveway had come across. And through our research process, discovered that we had an access right at the north end of our property that had been undeveloped, that we were able to make an address change to having our access on the north end of our property, which allowed us a very nice long driveway from a main road that was not originally even noted when we first looked at the property, because we'd come through the original driveway across the other piece of property. So easements and access, do you have direct access? Do you have a right of access? You need to just check on all those different aspects of property. So some things to think about when you're looking at a piece of property: visit at different times as you consider it. Linger. Evening, morning, afternoon. Talk to the neighbors. We had several conversations with our neighbor 2 houses down, who was renting the land right adjacent to the property at the time, and learned a number of things about our community. Some things that we didn't know before we moved in was that we could hear a nearby railroad, which is probably 4 or 5 miles away. We can hear the train whistle and actually the rumble of the railroad, depending on the weather conditions and how the sound travels through the air. It's not bothersome, but it's something that we hadn't actually thought of when we were here, and hadn't heard it while we were here, because it happens to be an evening train that comes through, and we weren't here during those times. Another thing is another evening sound is the proximity to a racetrack. It's probably 7 miles by the crow flies, but we can hear it, and the post-event fireworks following the event on summer evenings. It's not too abrasive. It sounds like a busy beehive off in the distance, but if we had been closer, and we did look at property that was closer, another log home actually, but it was within half a mile to a mile of the location. It was completely off the radar when we realized how close it was to the racetrack. So those are things to keep in mind, as well as we have in our particular space, within a mile and a half or so, the attempt to build a gravel mine on a piece of property that we had no idea that there was even a mineral rights overlay there. It's across the river, way out of kind of the range of our thought processes at the time. So be diligent. The community is fighting that gravel mine development at the moment, and it remains to be seen how that will happen. So other sounds to consider is, do you have an airport or a flyway nearby? We were recently looking at a very secluded, remote piece of property, and as we were standing along the river enjoying the view, two naval jets went roaring up the canyon, just very, very loud. And it's evidently a flyway because going to eastern Washington from western Washington. So that would be it actually was a major negative for that piece of property. Freeway noise, proximity to emergency medical services or fire. You're going to be hearing sirens on a regular basis. Farm noise or industry, could have a large industry or transient farm noise or constant farm noise, depending on how close you might live to a large farm operation. And various neighbor noises, quads, guns, other activities that may be occurring on adjacent neighbors. So a smaller piece of property, you're going to have more access to those kinds of neighbor issues than you would find on a larger piece of property, just by its very nature of size. And our piece of property, the one thing that was beneficial was that it was flat. So you want to check for your terrain. It can have some steep sections in it, that's fine, but you need to make sure that you have space for house site as well as gardening potential. We had a definite south-facing property, which we really was a big plus for us with the solar gain, not only ability to put up solar panels, but also just getting sun through the day. Remember that a north-facing property is going to be cooler. It's going to retain snow more. It's going to retain moisture more. It's going to be in the shade, so you won't have the benefit of sun exposure. You want to be out of a floodplain. We're just up on a bench out of the floodplain of our local river. But if you don't know how large the floodplain is, you might want to look at some maps. The old channel of a river can be completely masked by vegetation and housing developments, actually. But if it were to flood, that water would completely engulf the banks of the old riverbed. One thing that you should also consider is how close are you to the nearest volcano. Mud flows, pyroclastic blast zones. I was able to look at a map that showed flow based on terrain of a potential blast zone from Mount Baker, our local volcano, and was grateful when looking at our property that we were out of the flow zone path of a potential blow from Mount Baker. Also, microclimates. One thing that we learned after having moved in is that where we live, we're actually in a little bit of a cold sink, so we tend to have frost later and earlier in the season, and so we have to pay attention to our planting schedule to mitigate that frost schedule. And also, again, making certain of the proximity of mineral and mining rights in the vicinity and actually on your very own property. So utilities, when you're purchasing a property that's pre-existing, you should already have power, water, sewer in place. Make sure you inspect and verify the sewer. Ours was actually under a driveway that was being used, and so the recommendation was to no longer drive over it, which we have ceased doing. Make sure the well water is good water. Taste it and test it. Make sure your power is in place. Phone and internet. We have a cable-based internet and cable-based phone. Our cell service is made possible with a network extender for cell service on our property, and you can do that too. Be aware of the proximity of 5G and cellular towers. You don't want to be in the cone of EMF pollution, which can even happen with your own in-home devices, so that's something you want to be careful of and consider. High power transmission lines, underground petroleum lines, those are two things to be aware of, and make sure that you're far away from those types of things. We have a petroleum line that runs from northern Washington down to the airport that runs in rural areas across people's property, so something to pay attention to. So one of the things that we use, a tool that many counties have in one shape, form, or another, is the parcel search engine of the county. And in this particular box, we could enter the address of a particular property we were interested in if we didn't know the parcel number, or by the owner's first and last name, or by the road. So we can give you a list of properties or a specific property, and then you can search for it within the context of the search engine. So this is just a random property that pulled up, shows the owner information at the very top bar, gives a summary, which is the page we're on, various improvements, the land size, transfers, and its whole entire tax history and sale history, various permits that have been applied for, various map views, and comparables. There's various map links. There's IMAP, some interactive maps, some PDF of assessor's parcel maps. We also have the actual current legal description. You have the market value, you have the acreage at the bottom, 2.22 acres in a particular situation, various utilities that may be present. If there's nothing there, it's absent. And you have your market value or assessed value and property taxes in addition to other things. For that particular property we just looked at, this is one of the map views, the IMAP view, and has a very unique shape of the property. Most properties you can do some boundary adjustments if there is a necessity to do so. If you have adjacent property owners, that can become more challenging, but if you're dividing a piece, you can have more latitude in potential property boundary adjustment. This is a very unique shape of property as properties go. So this is a property in the area here that came on the market here recently, and looks like it's going to be a decent price value, and we can go and look at some of the different parts of this real estate listing site. This is Redfin. There are others, Zillow. Redfin is one I use a lot because we have the map on the left that you can scroll around and find properties that have become available. And this is one like we used when we discovered our home for sale. So this is the property detail from that Redfin website that's down lower. And one of the things that I would look for immediately to find more information is to find the tax ID number or the parcel number. So this is what you would then take to the county website and be able to access additional information. So there's some information that's also put here. It says water, other remarks, sewer not available, so that means there must be a septic system or it needs to perk for that. It has CCRs and access agreements. So those are some things to look for. General class is forestry and residential. And electricity is already pre-existing in the street. So those are some good things to look at. So going to the county site and looking at it, we can see that it's 19 acres. It was actually listed as 20 acres in the real estate listing, so we'll have to check on that a little bit. Here's a property description in the center. And the land market value is higher than its, so it's actually quite a bit lower than its sale price, which is interesting to note. And various taxes associated with it. And you can see that the owners live in Mount Vernon, so they're not actually that far away. So this is the PDF of the assessor's map, which is helpful in looking at it. So one thing I noticed right away is there's a blue dotted line going through the property, which indicates that there is a water draining across it from somewhere. So we see Wiseman Creek to the right, which is a named creek. So that's one that probably is year-round, and perhaps the one that's going across the property may be a seasonal creek, which is interesting. That would be a positive attribute, in my opinion. The thing that's a little interesting is looking at the little square box at the top there. I have to find out a little bit more information about that. And actually, I did look it up, and we'll see that a little bit later on. It turns out that it's owned by the same people as the larger parcel. It's a 1 acre parcel that I believe has been set aside as a building site. Probably already has a lot certification associated with it. And we'll just have to verify whether that piece of property is actually part of the contiguous 20. That would be something that would be important to know for sure. So looking at a different map view on the same county website, you can see that the surrounding properties are Sierra Pacific Timber to the west and north and mostly south. and that the properties immediately adjacent are undeveloped. The nearest neighbors are several properties over. You can see the square boxes there are indicating structures. So those are the nearest neighbors in this community. Highway 20 is down to the south. So as far as that goes, that's actually a good thing. It looks like a nice piece of property. You can see that right through the middle of the property is a contour of about 400 feet above sea level, and to the north you see the 800-foot contour mark. So the contour lines are about 100 feet in between contour lines there. So you can see that it's a fairly flat piece of property, which is very good to see. So each of these contour lines, again, looking at the contour a little bit more closely, it's mostly level, and that's good. The box again up there is that 1 acre parcel that's been set aside as a building lot, as a 1 acre building site. And we'll have to verify that was something you would want to verify with a realtor in the county as part of the sale, which it probably is, but you'd want to verify that. So another view that one has access to is on Google Maps, or actually here in iMap is a satellite view, an aerial view. And the nice thing about this is that the adjacent Sierra Pacific pieces have already been logged. So you don't have to worry about, for a number of years, having any logging activity on those parcels. Also improves your view opportunities from those pieces as well. It appears that this piece that is of interest is also treed, which is good, has firewood access. You will have to take some trees down to have garden space, but you can choose where that's done. If you already have property cleared, you may not have the choice as much to clear certain areas as otherwise. You can also see the aerial views of the neighbors that are adjacent by. So looking at this particular parcel and the inset square, it is the same owner. It's a 1 acre plot. The folks live in Mount Vernon. The MLS has 20 acres. When you look at the parcel number for that listed on the real estate website, it just has the 19 acres. Likely they to go together, but that's something you definitely want to verify. Again, your nearest neighbors are several properties over. And one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at the various real estate web resources is that the picture or the pin that's dropped is not necessarily exactly where the property lies. So where I've outlined in blue is the actual parcel versus where the pin got dropped by the real estate site. Something you'd want to verify is the creek, seasonal creek going across the property, and also the availability of water is a key point. Looking at the notes on the home, it says that there's a well available that is in moratorium that could be lifted at some point. So in order to have water access on this particular property, which may actually be a sticking point in its sale and could actually be a potential for a price reduction, is the water access. You would probably have to develop some kind of a rain catchment system, which can be done. There are neighbors in the vicinity that have done that, and that may be the only avenue available at this point. So remember, do your due diligence, trust in God. Proverbs 3:3-9 comes to mind. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel, and marrow to thy bones. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the firstfruits of all thine increase. Proverbs 3:3-9. So the prayer of our heart is that we are found faithful and that you are able to find a way to honor God and find a place in the country that can allow you to raise your family the way that God intended.
In conclusion, here are some things to consider when looking for your property. Are there trees on the property so you have a source of heat in terms of firewood? Is there water availability? Be that a well, be that surface water, a spring. You need to have a source of potable water, and it would be ideal to have some surface water. Also, is there space for a garden, and is it open and not in the shade, and is it facing south or at least east? And what about cell service? Um, for our particular searching, we wanted good cell service, and we wanted good internet available in the area. And internet can be either through cable or DSL, and both of those are good options. Satellite is available for places that don't have that, but that is not as convenient and fast as these other two options. And then what about employment? If your present job allows you to work remotely, what if that goes away? Are you in an area where you could get a physical job without an inconvenience of commuting too far? Also, identify if the owner lives there. We figured that out earlier. Look at the surrounding area. The iMap helps you do that. Also, physically look around besides Google Maps and satellite images to see what's not visible from the road. And then if you're really interested, you might talk to some neighbors. Ask about things like, is this a good neighborhood? We looked at a property one time that we thought was promising, and before we actually went to the property that was for sale, we noticed there was a organic greenhouse operation. So we went and talked to that guy and told him that we were considering looking at this property. He said, "You don't want to live here." He says, "The guy that lives right there, um, the cops are here all the time. He's actually pulled a gun on one of the neighbors." So that little bit of information saved our bacon, and we ended up not even looking at the property. So there's value in talking to the neighbors. Another thing you might ask about is what the water well situation is like. Yes, you can go to the county and you can look at well logs at the Environmental Health Department, and that's useful, but what kind of water? Is it really good water? For instance, where we now live, there is a neighbor who has perfect water. He doesn't. We have two neighbors that have perfect water. They don't have to filter at all. They don't have to treat the water. It's wonderful water. Um, but one of them, if he runs his irrigation on his lawn, in 20 minutes he'll be out of water. In our same area, we have his neighbor has arsenic in his water, in his well, so he can't drink the water. He's been bringing in bottles of water for years. Um, some of the neighbors run out of water in the summer, and some undeveloped land in our area, you're not able to drill a well at all because of a moratorium. So talking to neighbors, you can learn a lot of things. Southern exposure for the garden and for solar, for generating power. Consider noise factors. Is there a railroad track nearby, even across the valley? How busy is it? Um, and what about risks? Cell towers, power transmission lines, etc. Finally, this website is developed by Adventist Ministry called prophecyagain.org, and at the time of this recording, this was a brand new venture for them, and that's called Safe to Save Connect, STS Connect. And the purpose of this site, it's free, and the purpose is to connect people who are uh, making the effort to move in the country or follow God's guidance. We know from the first outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the Pentecost days that people worked together and shared their skills and their assets to further God's work. And we know that in the second outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the latter rain, that this kind of thing will happen again. So this is the purpose of setting up this particular Safe to Save Connect website. And I don't think there's ever been a time that I have done my physical presentation at a church or a camp meeting when during question and answer somebody says, well, what about me? An example is a lady told me that she raised her family in the country, her husband had passed away, her kids were gone, she lived on acreage and was unable to keep up with it. What should she do? Then you'll get someone else that'll say, we're a young couple, we don't have any money, but we want to do what the Lord wants us to do and move out of the city. Well, if those two entities could get together and be good together as a team, then they could share responsibilities and it could work out really well. So that's the purpose of this website, STS Connect. And in closing, I would like to um, read from Country Living, page 24 and 25. More and more as time advances, our people will have to leave the cities. For years, we've been instructed that our brethren and sisters, and especially families with children, should plan to leave the cities as the way opens before them to do so. Many will have to labor earnestly to help open the way. So the point of this presentation is to give you the tools so that you can labor earnestly to help open the way. And with prayer and with watching the Lord open and close doors, and with your earnest effort, I'm sure that you can find the place that the Lord wants you to be.